Buongiorno, professore e le maestre. Was trying to think of the right article because in Italian there are 7 articles, and still to this day, and I have my bracelets on, so I apologize, you can hear my clanking. It's kind of hard to pull all the correct articles together because there's the normal rules and then there's the non-normal rules. But today I'm not talking about that. What I want to talk about is the school system in Italy. And I can't help but think, with all of you being teachers, professors, that this would be interesting for you to learn. Part of what I'm going to talk about is going to be subjective and my opinion. The way I look at certain things in Italy from my experience of living there full time for 15 years traveling, and then having an Italian family. I'm not kind of crazy when I make this stuff up, and then sometimes people would want to argue with me. But this morning I was talking to my girlfriend, my best friend, kind of like a sister, about the communist style of the school system in Italy. And she was just like, communist? Where did you come up with that, Francesca? And I said, okay, it's a deviation of what I want to talk about with the school system, but let me put this little preface on this. So, Italy is a socialist country. And I'm smiling because I have certain things that I'm trying to behave with what I say here. But the word that I would use is kind of a puttana. And a puttana is the word for whore in Italian. So the country's got this situation where it is totally open to democracy and capitalism, but then it's totally open to communism. And whoever's going to give them money and do the thing that's best for Italy, going all the way back in Italy's history, at least in the 1950s forward, they kind of will accept the dance partner who comes to the table, who's, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And so if one dance partner is bringing more money to the table, then they're going to favor that dance partner, unless maybe you fight over something like a football team or a political thing, and then maybe you go the other way. So it's a very funny thing. And for the average American, you're not going to see it. You're not going to know it. I'm going to make a second little deviation here before I get into I want to talk about scuola materna, scuola media, scuola materna, elementare, media e superiore, and then university. And again, this is from my perspective, living in what has historically been a slightly communist voting village up until the last 10 or 15 years. And the political parties, they changed their names, so it's kind of hard for you to know which one is where. The Partito Democratico or Democratica sounds like, oh, that's the Democratic Party. No, that's the Reformed Communist Party. So I still don't get it. But what I do know is my girlfriend, who is a lead person at the hospital for Spoleto, said, listen, Francesca, she has a cultural art association. And she said to me, why don't we do this? These are the parties. They're running for a new mayor. How about you get on the most extreme right or left, and whichever one you choose, I'll get on the extreme other side, and we'll just grab the party that we'll be with, so that if the mayor that's in this party wins, one of us is in with the cultural association, and it doesn't matter which way you go. So I was in a real dilemma because I was asked to run politically in Italy, which is crazy because I did run, I was 9 years in public office for a small quasi-governmental agency for Colorado, and I won all kinds of awards for everything I did prior to disability. So my girlfriend said, you can go either way, but I was in a dilemma because my family in down south is proud Communist Party, politically affiliated. But I also know, as a historical spy researcher, I go into archives, besides being an artist and a painter and all that, and doing what I'm doing now, travel coaching. I'm a Cold War researcher. My specialty is 1950 through 1958, and I've busted open a true CIA spy story that happened in my village. that is still not declassified in the American government. And my joke is I've been put on a hit list because every time I try to go between airports, they always pull this little disabled grandmother out of the line and frisk me like, on something in particular. And that's because I've done a bunch of FOIA requests and I've rebuilt this entire spy story that's hidden from the Cold War. Okay, so my family is part of the Communist Party, but it's not communist like you think of in Northern Korea or in China or in some of those countries. It's a very milked down type of communist. And then there's socialist, which is what the country pretty much recognizes that, but then it also has the democratic or capitalist part of it. So you'll find me using these terms because it's what I've experienced. So I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm a very genuine, authentic, and present person. So the way it starts is got my youngest daughter passport when she was 3 months old, the littlest one, Antonia. And I actually started playing DVDs in Italian of lullabies and then DVDs for active playing music from the moment she was born. So when she would go down for a nap, I'd put on the Italian lullabies. And then when she was old enough and she was playing, I always had in the background the Italian more lively songs playing, because I know that from birth they can grow certain roots or radices that creates the ability for them to be massively gifted with multiple languages when they get older. And at that time, although I was traveling with her and she was conceived in Italy, but she was born in the United States. So I say made in Italy, born in the USA. It's like a little joke. Antonia, if I remember correctly, although she was traveling there as a total infant, I think 2005, she was 4 years old. It was 2005. I put her in her first scuola materna, which is it was an international preschool in Florence, and I was going to scuola di Istituto di Lorenzo di Medici Arte or something like that. Okay, so she was in scuola materna that whole summer in Florence, and then in 2006 she was in Camuccia's scuola materna, where they had no English. The international one in Florence had some English, but she had, got up and running. And then the next year she was in a 100% little tiny village Italian preschool. And, we got through it. So that would have been 2006. She was born in 2001. That would have left her at 5. Then the following year, we showed up late for school because it was my medical emergency year. 2006, November, I had the open heart surgery, then the mini strokes, the baby heart attack, and then we're now in 2007. And I packed up with 3 suitcases. She would have been, at that point, 6 years old, and me. And I showed up in Spoleto with my Italian boyfriend from Rome and got us an apartment, and I attempted to homeschool her, but because my health was still disintegrating at that point with chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalomyelitis, I had a lot of immune disorder things which were not yet diagnosed, a lot of brain fog, some mobility issues. My Italian family convinced me, just put her in the public school, and I thought, oh God, what am I doing here? Because I had brought over this teaching program to teach her, homeschool her, but my health was getting worse. So I stuck her in first grade, elementary, and she proceeded to go to elementary for 5 years, of which there is English being taught, but the English is being taught by the maestre, which is the teacher. And although I would show up for the parent-teacher conferences and try to speak in English, the English teacher, even though she was Italian, couldn't understand a word I said. No matter how much I slowed it down, cut it up, it was hopeless. She couldn't, yet she's the English teacher. So then I'd speak in Italian, and then she'd kind of criticize me for how bad my Italian was. And I said, I'm not even a teacher, lady. You're a teacher. You're the English teacher. So if you're going to criticize my Italian, because I was brand new there, with grammatical mistakes, we'll just flip right over to English and we'll see how you like that. And that kind of shut her up and realized that she needed to meet me halfway. And that was elementary. Then the next school was media, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. And the goal of media is, I can say that the English teacher in scuola media, middle school, elementary, elementari, media, middle school, superiori, superior. So those aren't too hard to kind of catch those, excuse me. We heard about this really tough exam at the end of the 3 years of media. We heard that by the last 6 months of the scuola media, which would be the last 6 months of 8th grade, the teachers were honing in on where they were going to be sending you for superiori. It was this huge thing that we had heard about. And so school was still pretty good for her in scuola media. And she got a really good English teacher there. And then we started narrowing in on the last 6 months of media, and they started having open houses at all of the high schools. Superiore, that's the general word. But in the superiore system, there are probably about up to 15 choices, 15 different high schools. You've got your trade schools, which could be electrical, plumbing, mechanics, the cooking school, but then within this cooking school, the alberghiero, which is another word for the cooking school, there is being a barista, how to work behind the counter at the bar, how to be a cameriera is a waiter or waitress, cuoco or chef. Then there's tourism, 2 types of tourism within that school, and I can't really remember. One was to be a travel agent, and I think the other one might have been like tour guides or something like that. But even within the cooking school, so you had the barista, the waiter, the chef, and I think there was another one. There was like 7 different divisions in the alberghiero, which is the cooking school. Okay, so those are more your trade schools. When you come out of those high schools, you actually come out with not only a diploma, but a certificate of accomplishment, a certain diploma of you are qualified to do this job. You're at this level of an electrician, this level of a plumber, this level of a cook. So you come out with a minimum standard of a trade, a certified skill. Then there's a school after the trade schools that I can't remember the name of it, but it's more like you want to be a draftsman for drawing and having drawings for the architect. Maybe you want to be a bookkeeper. And there's a whole bunch of occupations in there. And there are those schools that start laying the foundation to be an accountant, maybe a paralegal. And those are more of a professional school. Then you have the next one, which is called liceo. Liceo. One is liceo. Licei is plural. And you've got the linguistico, classico, scientifico, humanities, artistico. I even heard that there was a designer school, and there's several others, but depending upon where you live in Italy is whether they have those. So you've got the language school, the classic school, and classic is ancient Greek and Latin. You learn 3 years of ancient Greek and Latin language, and then the last 2 years, you're reading the books of the philosophers in those languages. So that's classic. Then you've got the math school. Scientifico is math and science. And then artistico, which is really surprising because, America would never think that the art school would be a college-bound school, but in Italy, these licees, when you go to a licee, they are college-bound high schools. You do not get a diploma. You don't get a diploma. They're harder. They're higher up on the list of all the schools. What you get is a certificate of hours completed. And often your 5th year of this school of the licees counts towards your first year of college. So in America, we typically do 4 high school, 4 college for the initial. In Italy, they do 5 high school and 3 for college. But in reality, if it's the licee schools, that is. So when my daughter went to 3 years at Classico, she suffered kind of like a clinical depression because the pressure was so high in that school. The style of teaching was very communist. It was very dictator. It was forced recital of learning and conduct, behavior, the way you dressed. It was the school that was the most prestigious for you to come out the most open-minded person for life. And it's surprising how many students kill themselves going to Classico and getting 3 years of ancient Greek and Latin and then learning all of these things to come out and have a non-incidental job, a job that in America would be a lower level job. And so you will often find in Italy, in all kinds of working locations that you would never expect, you're going to find, if you were able to speak to them in their language, or if they could speak to you in English, you will be shocked how unbelievably, sorry, I've got a little cold, how unbelievably educated some of these people that are in what are considered for our jobs, menial jobs, but their mind is so extensive because they went to Classico. My daughter did 3 years of Classico, and then she switched and went over to Artistico. And then that's the other thing is, who would think an artist school would be college bound? But because historical preservation, history of art is so important in Italy, they have a specific school that has 2 divisions of art in there. There's either the cinema, which is the film, or you've got the scenografia. Sometimes it's hard for me to transfer between the languages. Scenografia, which means set design. So they begged my daughter not to leave Classico because she was one of their better students, but psychologically there were so many kids at that point that were actually committing suicide in Spoleto, jumping off the bridge, let alone adults commit suicide. They kind of hide a lot of these things. And this is not unknown to the locals. Same thing as in France. One of the things I learned about the Paris subway is they're not going to say and announce in the news there was a suicide. They say there was an incident with train on this thing and it's been intercepted. And they call it something like an incident. And all the French know that when they advertise the train is closed on that track for an incident, most likely it was a suicide. But they don't want the tourists to know. And that's the same thing, and that's in Paris, and that's the same thing in my village. We have a ponte, the bridge that goes back centuries, and suicides have always been on that bridge for centuries. And we're talking sometimes it's a lot of suicides in the course of a year. Luckily, with the earthquake, they closed the Passeggiata for you to not be able to cross over. And I have to say that at the point in time my daughter was struggling with a clinical depression, the little one, I was really grateful when it was closed, because some of my girlfriends in the village, some of the other people, they have had children commit suicide, and their kids' photos come up each year on Facebook. And I remember these kids, and it rips my heart out, you know. So the Artistico school is for, the cinema is to make film and photography and that kind of media. And then the scenografia, what she had to do when she wanted to transfer in, she had to go back and do a recapture on the 3 years. Because usually by the end of the 2nd year of the high school you're in, if you're going to switch high schools, you do it at the 2nd year. She did it at the end of the 3rd year. Now, luckily, because I was doing tons of puddle jumping with her to many other countries in Europe, I was able to always put her in art classes through the Airbnb, looking for experiences. We documented it. She always came home with a product. So she had to pick some type of book to be a theater play. She had to design a 3D set for the theater that, you know, curtains can move in and move out, and it was small. And then she had to take that set design and draw it out geometrically in measurements and then take the geographical measurements and put it in a computer program, something like CAD or something like that. So that in reality, not only did she know the story and where the story was going to be broken up, she designed the set so that it could be moving. And then she made it into measurements and then in CAD so that then they could print out the measurements to the construction workers who say, here, build the tree this big. And they then knew the scope based on the set, the physical measurements of the set. So that's why you're surprised at all these things. And all of these schools, at least at Leche level, have language. So my daughter, in her 5 years of going to high school, in middle school, she took 3 years of French. In high school, she took 3 of Latin, 3 of ancient Greek. She took 5 of English. But by the time she had graduated high school, she had had 13 years all in Italian, 13 years of part-time English, 3 years of French, 3 years of ancient Greek, and 3 years of Latin. The school systems are amazing, but they have kind of a communist feel about it that, she had wore outfits to school that were skirts down to her knee where she looked adorable. And she got reprimanded that the skirt wasn't long enough. Even though in the other schools, the girls are going with like tank tops and their boobs hanging out and their bellies hanging out, and it was totally okay. But this school had a very much a dictator type of approach to it. In reality, 3 years and 2 years was probably the perfect blend for her, because now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the college, and there will be people that disagree with me. I am talking from my personal observation and my personal experience. So, once you graduate high school, it appears that you can apply to any college you want, and you will probably get accepted. It's not like in America where they have all these strict criteria of whether they're going to accept you. They will accept you. Then you pay your taxes, you pay for the books, a school tax, and then you rent an apartment with other students in the city where the school is. You take your courses, and school is 3 years. And I have known of at least 6 students, at least, where this is true. Once they completed their 3 years and they got straight A's, they were like B pluses, A minuses, and A pluses, straight A students. Just because you complete the 3 years doesn't mean you get your certificate of graduation. You have to go into this thing that is kind of like what they do in ancient Greece. I don't know if it might be a thesis, but they pull certain professors from your university and then other professors from another university, and they sit there in an arch watching you. You then have to, for high school, you pick a topic. That topic is an entire presentation that must cover every single subject you studied, and you must have all the visuals and support material, and you get up there and give this oral explanation and testimony, and then these people on this curved panel start nailing you at the end with questions. And you either pass or fail, and you get assigned a specific number grade. In reality, at the end of high school, they did this too, and it was very stressful because you got a few of your own teachers on the panel, but then you've got teachers from another school who have no emotional attachment to you, and they watch student after student. And so she did really great and passed high school really great. But my girlfriend has 3 daughters, and one of the daughters has a boyfriend, and then there were several other kids, my ex-boyfriend from Rome, and several other kids that I knew of that had almost, 2 of them had not completed, but they got into conflicts with the professors because this power control trip of superiority happened. And one of them just dropped out when he was 2 classes away from finishing the 3 because of conflict. And the conflict was so harsh with the professor because they will force you into submission. It's kind of an interesting thing that the kids are raised in Italy speaking third person to their professors. So like there's me, you, us, we, them, they, well, they have a third person, a you third person. So I can say, hi, Debbie, how are you? Okay. Well, if you were a person of higher rank than me, I would have to say, good morning, Senora Debbie. How is she? And I have to call you the she in the third person out of respect to create a separation between us. And if it's a man, buongiorno, signore Rosso. And then I'd have to say, how is she? And when I'm saying she, I'm speaking to you. So the kids have this forced level of respect, which might actually be nice with you guys being teachers. You're probably thinking, boy, wouldn't that have been nice if you could have had some of that where the kids had to submit. The only thing is sometimes they take it overboard. So what happens that I've seen is one of my girlfriend's daughters probably took the test 8 to 9 times in the college thing. So even though she got straight A's for the 3 years she went to college, she kept failing in that arched final thesis. I forget what it's called. And then she gave up and never got her diploma. And I have known so many students and people who in fact went to college for the 3 years with straight A, fantastic grades, but they ran out of money paying the tax every time they had to go back in front of this panel for the thesis. So let me bring this a little bit forward. So there's a particular gal that you might have seen. Well, no, you're not in my group, but you'll see a picture of me in a white gown, and she had on a red pantsuit, and my daughter had on a black and white jumpsuit. The gal in the red suit had probably gone 16 times before she passed this interrogation. And I just couldn't understand this. I thought, well, I know that she's not stupid. I know that she had great grades. Well, I got to go to her actual graduation, and this is what I saw. There was a very small class from a very large university. Sorry, my glasses have spots on them. That was actually, had finally graduated and passed this thesis. And when each of the 30 or 40 students walked through, they read off their final grade. And what I noticed was there was not one student who had gotten lower than an 87. Not one. Not one student got 70, 71, 72, 75, 78, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, not one. Well, you guys know that there's a bell curve. There is no way. And what I realized is the professors are somewhat on a power trip, which comes into that historical communist subservient mentality, which is why I started with this, that they just kept failing the students over and over and over again. And she had to go through that interrogation 16 times. And until she hit an 87, she couldn't get her diploma. Well, when I learned that and I saw it firsthand with everybody that I knew in all my years, I knew that that psychologically would only break my daughter and she would probably not get her college degree. So I made the decision that it was best for her to come back into the States. That was one reason. Plus, I also felt it was time for her to acclimate back into the American culture because the sweetness of doing nothing, el dolce far niente, is a little bit too comfortable at times with the kids, that they don't need a career. They don't want a career. I'm going to live off of my mom and dad's pension. And that's an Italian expression. Like, I don't give up SHIT. And the kids, that's one of the problems you got happening over there now. We have a different problem in our country. So I helped my daughter, with the help of a college coach, prepare for my daughter to win scholarships. And we used the book, Colleges That Changed Lives, was referred to us. And we had picked out 20 schools at first, and then we went back and swapped out another 10, put together a fantastic resume. She is a third culture kid, and what that means is when a child is born into one culture and is raised by the parent of that culture, but then they translocate or transport prior to the age of 12 to a second culture, the kid knows what the parent behaves like and knows what the current culture behaves like, and then they come together, and so they've got the parents' culture and where they're living, but then they create a blended mix. Now, third culture kids is a term coined by Ruth Useem, I think is her name. She is a sociologist that coined this term probably in the 1950s, third culture kid. And then somebody came back many years later and came up with global nomad, which is obviously different than a, what's that new word? Digital nomad. So global nomad is the terminology for the more newer term than for third culture kid. And my daughter wrote a stellar paper on being a third culture kid and the dilemmas and the pros and cons. And it's a situation where you never know where you find home. Home is the people you find along the way. Home is not a place. Home is the people around the world that you find on your journey, that you bond with, and that becomes home for a third culture kid. Anyway, Francesca Elisabetta Owens, Instagram, Travel from the Inside Out. I am getting a website built. For right now, I've got a couple of things. It'll be travelfromtheinsideout.org, but that's not up yet. My email is travelfromtheinsideout@gmail.com. And I do have something called El Dolce Far Niente, 10-night cultural experience. And it is, I'm not a tour guide, travel agent, destination management, or seller of travel. I put together these 10-night packages in my village, usually women 50, 55 and older. And you come in, I create a coaching group, you pay me a flat fee, and you come with 7 other women, and I reserve all the dinners in the village. I reserve 5 hilltop villages that normally you never get to, but I've got a really tiny and comfortable vehicle that sits 9 of us. The driver and me is 2, 7 women in the vehicle. And we get right up to the hilltop, and these are spectacular villages that are not on your normal tours. We have one picnic lunch offer in Monteluco, which is a very special place, and I give a orientation walking tour. So it's a lot of information. And if you want more information, write me and say, I'm interested in learning about that 10-day package. I'm also creating a travel course, and there's a lot of things. It's like I have so many things happening so fast that I just am a little bit dragging with some of the technology. But find me, and I'd love to meet you. I have a YouTube channel, Travel from the Inside Out. So I think that's about it. Francesca Elisabetta. I hope you enjoyed this. Ciao tutti, buona giornata, ciao.